Why did the room go quiet the moment she stepped inside? Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because silence followed her like a shadow that knew where to stand. 250 operators filled the officers' club, shoulder to shoulder, the kind of men whose presence usually bent a room around them. Combat veterans, team leaders, men who had learned to measure one another by scars, deployments, and the way they carried themselves when no one was watching. And yet when Lieutenant Kara Thorne entered, something shifted. She stood near the edge of the room in her dress uniform, posture straight, hands relaxed at her sides. She wasn't tall. She didn't project dominance. She didn't wear confidence like armor. If anything, she looked deliberately smaller than the space demanded, as if she had learned early that drawing attention could be dangerous. Whispers moved anyway. Too young. Too quiet. Too different. The gold trident on her chest caught the light as she turned slightly, and every time it did, another pair of eyes locked onto it. That symbol carried weight in this room. It had been earned through cold water, broken sleep, and moments when quitting would have been easier than continuing to breathe. Some men respected it instantly. Others resented what it represented. Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hawkins didn't bother whispering. He stood with a drink in his hand, voice loud enough to travel, laughter riding the edges of his words like permission. He spoke about tradition, about standards, about how history wasn't supposed to change just because it made people uncomfortable. The laughter that followed was uneven, forced, sharp. Kara didn't respond. She breathed once, slow, controlled. Her eyes stayed forward. Across the room, an elderly man watched carefully. Colonel Declan Thorne didn't move to intervene. Not yet. He had seen rooms like this before. He knew how quickly curiosity turned into cruelty when pride felt threatened. Kara had been raised for rooms like this, not with speeches or warnings, but with habits drilled into her long before she wore a uniform. How to stand without inviting challenge. How to listen without absorbing insult. How to let silence do the work that ego always ruined. She had learned that expression was a leak. And tonight she refused to leak. Hawkins noticed. He stepped closer, words turning personal, tone lowering. The space between them narrowed and the room seemed to inhale as one. Kara felt it, the shift from noise to focus, but she didn't flinch. Inside, her heart wanted to run. She didn't let it. She had spent years learning how to stay still when every instinct screamed to react. Years understanding that the first person to break composure usually lost far more than the moment. Hawkins leaned in, smiling like he expected fear. She gave him nothing. And that, more than anything else, pressed on his ego. What happens when silence refuses to play along? It unnerves people who rely on noise to feel powerful. Hawkins spoke louder now, his words circling the room, dragging others into the moment whether they wanted to be there or not. He talked about politics, about optics, about how standards had a way of softening when history demanded a headline. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Kara listened without reacting, her breathing steady, hands loose at her sides. She could feel the attention narrowing, the room reshaping itself around the tension. Men leaned closer. Drinks paused halfway to mouths. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was anticipation. She finally turned her head, slowly, deliberately, and acknowledged him with just enough movement to make it clear she had been listening all along. "Sir," she said evenly, her voice calm, professional. "I earned my place here under the same standards you did. I'd appreciate it if you stepped back and called it a night." That was all. No defense. No explanation. No plea. The room reacted as if something fragile had shattered. Hawkins smiled, but the amusement was gone. That sentence had denied him what he wanted. She hadn't tried to win the crowd. She hadn't argued emotion with ego. She had treated him like an officer who had crossed a line. To a man like Hawkins, that was unforgivable. He closed the distance again. "Careful," he said quietly. "You don't get to lecture me on standards." Kara didn't step back. Around them, whispers replaced laughter. The energy sharpened. Men shifted positions without realizing they were doing it, bodies responding to a situation they had learned to read in other contexts. This wasn't about debate anymore. It was about control. When Hawkins mentioned her father, the air changed. Some names didn't fade in rooms like this. They stayed, lingering in the space long after the person was gone. Her father's call sign carried weight, earned through years of quiet competence and a death that had never quite left the community. Hawkins said the name carelessly. Then cruelly. The room went still. Kara felt something tighten inside her, not rage, not grief, but recognition. A line had been crossed, not because of pride, but because some things weren't weapons. Her grandfather stepped forward then, voice calm but firm. A warning offered, not demanded. Hawkins ignored it. He stepped closer. Too close. And in that moment, Kara made a decision that had nothing to do with proving herself and everything to do with ending what was unfolding before it turned into something worse. How fast can a moment change when balance replaces force? Faster than most people realize. Hawkins' posture shifted, subtle but telling. His confidence rose as his balance began to slip, the way it always did when certainty outran awareness. Kara noticed everything. The angle of his shoulders, the tension in his forearm, the way his weight loaded unevenly. She didn't look at his face. She watched his center. Her feet adjusted by inches, not retreating, not advancing, just balance, chosen deliberately, the kind of stance that invited mistakes without advertising readiness. Somewhere in the room, a few men noticed details that didn't fit the story they had been telling themselves. How still she was, how relaxed her hands remained, how her eyes tracked movement without hurry. Hawkins raised his arm. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. In that fraction, the room held its breath. When he moved, it wasn't wild. It was confident, controlled enough to feel justified, a motion meant to intimidate more than injure. Kara didn't meet it. She let it pass. Her body rotated just enough, redirecting the momentum he had already committed to. The movement was smooth, economical, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what they were seeing. As his balance broke, she acted. One compact strike under the ribs, precise, timed. A second, clean motion to the jaw. No wind-up. No excess. Hawkins dropped hard, his body hitting the floor with a sound that cut through the room like a line being drawn. Then nothing. No cheers. No shouts. Only silence. Kara stepped back once, creating space, posture neutral, hands lowering naturally. She didn't look down for long. She didn't need to. "He moved to hit me," she said calmly. "I defended myself. That was all." The words landed like a report, factual, complete. The room didn't argue. What happens after strength reveals itself without spectacle. Confusion first. 250 operators stood frozen, eyes shifting between the man on the floor and the woman who had put him there without drama or anger. Drinks were forgotten. Conversations never resumed. Authority arrived quietly. Accounts were given short, aligned, stripped of ego. Hawkins had closed distance. Hawkins had initiated contact. Kara had responded with restraint. No one embellished. No one needed to. The Admiral's gaze lingered on her, not judgment but assessment. He had seen excess before. This wasn't it. "There will be a review," he said. "Procedure, not punishment. You understand the environment you're operating in." Yes, sir. He acknowledged her name, her father's. The room shifted again, something softening without ceremony. Recognition didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. As Hawkins was carried out, no one followed him. No one spoke on his behalf. The story he had tried to tell had ended without his permission. One by one, restrained salutes appeared. Not formal, not performative, instinctive. Kara didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. What remains when the noise finally dies? Work. The next morning would bring briefings, scrutiny, expectations that hadn't disappeared, only sharpened. Acceptance didn't erase resistance. It simply changed its shape. Outside, the night air felt heavier, cooler. Her grandfather walked beside her for a moment before speaking. "You did exactly what you were trained to do," he said. That was enough. No praise. No questions. Just confirmation. Kara nodded once. She understood now what she had always been taught but never tested so publicly. Strength didn't need an audience. It didn't announce itself. It waited. It acted. And then it stepped back into silence. Some lessons aren't learned through shouting. They're learned through watching someone refuse to become what the moment tries to demand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What does it feel like when everyone decides who you are, before you ever get the chance to speak? Kara Thorne felt it the moment she took her seat in the briefing room the next morning. Not hostility. Not exactly. Something quieter. The kind of distance that isn't created by fear, but by uncertainty. The room was smaller than the officers' club, more functional. No drinks, no music, just steel chairs, a long table, and faces trained to reveal nothing. Operators filtered in one by one, some she recognized from the night before, others she didn't. A few nodded in acknowledgement, most didn't. She didn't expect them to. The incident had traveled faster than she had slept. Stories always did in places like this. But stories bent under pressure, and she knew better than to believe any version circulating in the air was clean. She sat upright, hands folded loosely, eyes forward. Inside, the anxiety crept in anyway. Not fear of punishment. Fear of being misunderstood. She had defended herself. That was clear, but clarity didn't always survive contact with tradition, and she was still new, still different, still carrying more meaning than she ever asked for. The door closed. Rear Admiral Hayes entered without ceremony. Conversation stopped, not because he demanded it, but because discipline recognized itself. He didn't begin with the incident. That alone tightened the room. Instead, he spoke about tasking, a deployment window closing faster than expected, a mission with limited margin for error, intelligence incomplete, terrain unforgiving. Kara listened carefully, taking notes she might never need again. She had learned early that attention was a form of respect, not just for authority, but for the moment itself. Then Hayes' gaze lifted. "Lieutenant Thorne," he said. She met his eyes. "Sir, you're attached to this unit, effective immediately." A pause followed, not dramatic, just long enough for the room to absorb it. No one protested. No one welcomed it either. Kara felt something twist in her chest, not doubt exactly. Awareness. This wasn't a reward. It wasn't a test she could pass with numbers or marksmanship scores. This was exposure. Hayes continued, voice even. "Your role will be limited, observation, support. You will not be in command." She nodded, "Understood, sir." The word support carried weight. It always did. Support roles were where trust either began or quietly failed. As the briefing moved on, Kara felt the room recalibrate around her again. Not rejecting, not accepting. Measuring. When it ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Operators stood, collected gear, spoke in low voices. No one rushed her. No one blocked her path. That was its own kind of message. Outside, the air smelled like salt and fuel. The base was waking up, movement everywhere, purpose layered over routine. Kara adjusted the strap of her bag and started toward the staging area alone. She preferred it that way. Being alone gave her space to breathe without performance. She thought of her father, not the legend others spoke about, but the man who had taught her how to clean a rifle slowly, deliberately, as if patience itself was part of the mechanism. He had never talked about proving people wrong, only about doing the job right. That thought steadied her. Why do some teams feel like closed doors, even when they don't say no? Kara learned the answer within the first hour. The unit moved efficiently, conversations clipped and professional. They didn't exclude her outright. They just didn't include her unless required. Information flowed around her instead of through her. It wasn't cruelty. It was caution. She recognized it because she had felt it before, in training, in rooms where her presence disrupted expectations. People didn't know where to place her yet, so they left space. She didn't fill it. When equipment was distributed, she double-checked hers quietly. When routes were discussed, she listened more than she spoke. When someone gave an order, she executed it without commentary. Still, the glances came. Some curious, some skeptical, some unreadable. During a pause, one of the operators, older, scarred in the way time left marks no medic could erase, watched her from across the room. "You always this quiet?" he asked, not unkindly. She met his eyes, only when it matters. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once and turned away. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. That was enough. As the hours passed, tension gave way to rhythm, the kind that emerged when people focused on task instead of theory. Kara felt herself settle into it, instincts aligning with training. She caught a small oversight in a navigation plan, nothing dramatic, just a detail about elevation change that could slow extraction. She waited, let the moment arrive naturally. When it did, she spoke once. Quiet, specific. The room paused. Someone checked the data again. She was right. No one commented on it. They just adjusted the plan and moved on. But the air changed slightly. Not warmer, more precise. What does it cost to carry restraint when everyone expects reaction? More than people think. By the time the team deployed, exhaustion had dulled the sharpest edges of judgment. Fatigue made people honest in small ways, less guarded, more revealing. Still, no one asked her about the night before. Kara was grateful. She didn't want to explain something that hadn't been about emotion. She hadn't struck Hawkins because she was angry. She had acted because the situation had reached a point where inaction would have been worse. Explaining that never satisfied people who wanted drama. The mission unfolded without incident at first. Long hours, controlled movement, the quiet tension of waiting for something that might never happen. Kara took her position where assigned, eyes scanning, body still. She felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the world reducing itself to what mattered. In that space, doubts didn't survive. Only decisions did. When contact finally came, it was brief and chaotic, but contained. The team responded with practiced efficiency. Kara followed orders, supported movement, covered angles that never filled. She didn't fire a shot. And she didn't need to. When it was over, no one congratulated anyone. They never did. Success in this line of work was measured by absence, of casualties, of mistakes, of names added to walls. As they regrouped, the same operator from earlier glanced at her again. "Good eyes back there," he said. She nodded, team effort. He almost smiled. Why does respect arrive so quietly when it finally shows up? Because it isn't looking for attention. Back on base, the team dispersed without ceremony. Gear returned. Reports filed. The work folded back into routine as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Kara sat alone for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain. Fatigue settled in its place, heavy but honest. She thought about how close she had come, more than once, to speaking when silence had been the better choice. About how easy it would have been to react, to demand recognition, to force acceptance. She hadn't. Not because she was afraid. Because she understood something many people didn't learn until much later. Belonging couldn't be taken. It had to be allowed. As she stood to leave, footsteps approached. The Admiral didn't stop far away this time. "You did well," he said simply. "Thank you, sir." He studied her for a moment. "You're aware this won't get easier." "Yes, sir." A pause. "Good," he said. "Neither does the work." When he left, Kara exhaled slowly. The path ahead wasn't clearer. But it was real. And for the first time since she had walked into that officers' club, she felt something settle inside her. Not pride, not relief. Resolve. Quiet. Unyielding. The kind that didn't need witnesses to exist. What happens when the doubt stops being loud and starts becoming personal? Kara realized it halfway through the night watch, when the radio stayed silent longer than it should have. Silence wasn't unusual, it was expected, but this one felt different, thicker, like the air itself was listening. She adjusted her position slightly, shifting weight without making sound, eyes moving across the terrain in slow, deliberate arcs. The world beyond the perimeter was a study in shadows and distance, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just enough uncertainty to keep the mind from relaxing. This was where doubt liked to live. Not in confrontation, not in arguments or open resistance, but in the quiet moments where no one was watching closely enough to correct you. Kara had learned early that doubt didn't always come from others. Sometimes it grew from inside, fed by repetition, by the subtle reminders that you didn't quite belong, by the way silence could turn inward if you weren't careful. She checked her breathing, slow, controlled. Across the perimeter, a teammate shifted, a soft signal, normal. She logged it mentally and kept scanning. Her role tonight was observation only, support, again. She didn't resent it, but she felt it. The part of her that had trained just as hard as anyone else, the part that had endured cold, exhaustion, and failure without an audience, wanted to be tested openly, wanted clarity, a line to cross where effort translated cleanly into trust. Instead, she existed in the in-between, proving herself without being asked to prove anything. The radio crackled once, a brief transmission, routine. Kara responded softly, her voice steady, professional. She didn't add unnecessary words, she never did. When the line went quiet again, she felt the old familiar tension return. Not fear of the unknown, fear of being unseen. She pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It never was. Why do some tests never announce themselves? Because the people giving them don't always realize they are. The next day unfolded without incident, but something had changed. The team moved the same way, spoke the same way, but the space around Kara felt narrower, less empty. She was included in a discussion about timing, asked her opinion on a secondary route, small things, quiet things. They mattered. She answered only when necessary, careful not to overstep. She didn't soften her assessments to be liked. She didn't sharpen them to be noticed. She spoke truth simply. Later, while cleaning equipment, one of the younger operators hesitated near her. He looked like he wanted to say something and didn't quite know how to start. "Lieutenant," he said finally. She looked up. "Yeah." He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "Last night at the club." She waited, didn't rush him. I didn't think it would go the way it did. He glanced away, embarrassed. Guess I had it wrong. Kara considered her response carefully. It's easy to, she said. Most people do. He nodded slowly, as if that answered more than he had asked. They returned to their work without another word. That night, alone in her quarters, Kara finally let herself feel the weight she had been carrying. It settled into her shoulders, her spine, the quiet places behind her eyes. She wasn't angry. She was tired. Tired of being an idea instead of a person. Tired of carrying expectations she hadn't volunteered for. Tired of knowing that one mistake, just one, would be remembered longer than 10 flawless decisions. She lay back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling. Her father had once told her that resilience wasn't about enduring everything without breaking. It's about knowing what bends, he'd said, and choosing not to. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. Why does pressure always arrive when you think you've earned a moment to breathe? It came during the briefing. New intelligence, incomplete, urgent. A secondary objective had surfaced, time-sensitive, high-risk, limited visibility. The kind of situation where decisions had to be made fast and hesitation carried a cost. The room filled with tension as maps were adjusted and routes reconsidered. Voices overlapped briefly, then settled. Kara listened. Something didn't sit right. Not the mission itself, the assumptions. She studied the layout again, tracing angles and distances. Her mind ran through scenarios automatically, patterns built from years of training and instinct. There was a gap. A narrow one, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. She hesitated. This was the moment restraint became complicated. She wasn't in command. Her role was limited. Speaking now could be seen as overreach, or worse, second-guessing. The doubt crept back in. What if she was wrong? What if she slowed things down unnecessarily? What if this confirmed every suspicion she was still trying to outgrow? The room pressed forward, momentum building. Kara inhaled, then spoke. Sir, she said calmly, cutting through the noise without raising her voice. There's an exposure point here we're underestimating. The room paused. Eyes turned toward her. She pointed, not dramatically, just enough to orient attention. If the timing shifts by even a minute, that ridge becomes a liability. We lose cover on approach. Silence followed. Someone recalculated. Another checked the data. A long moment passed. You're right, the team lead said finally. Adjust the plan. No acknowledgement beyond that. But something else shifted. Not acceptance. Trust. What does it mean to be trusted when the stakes finally rise? It means the margin for error disappears. The operation that followed was harder than expected. Terrain fought every step. Weather turned without warning. Visibility dropped. Kara moved with the team, senses sharp, mind clear. She felt the weight of responsibility settle into her, not as pressure but as purpose. At one point, movement ahead froze the line. A decision had to be made quickly. Advance or hold. The team lead glanced back. At her. Just once. Not asking permission. Asking assessment. She scanned, calculated, and shook her head slightly. Hold. They did. Seconds later, distant movement confirmed the choice. A misstep avoided. A problem that never materialized because someone had waited. They moved again. Later, as extraction neared, a minor injury slowed one operator. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to complicate timing. Kara adjusted position instinctively, covering without being asked. No heroics, no announcement. Just presence. When they finally cleared the area, the relief was quiet and heavy. The kind that came from knowing how close things had been. Back aboard transport, no one spoke for a long time. Then softly someone said, "Good call back there." Kara nodded. That was all. Why does belonging feel different once you stop chasing it? Because it stops being about you. Back on base, the debrief was brief. Facts, timelines, outcomes. No one mentioned her name more than necessary. That was fine. As the room emptied, the team lead lingered. "You handled yourself well," he said, "not just today." She met his gaze. "Thank you." A pause. "This place," he added, choosing his words carefully, "has a way of testing people sideways." She allowed a small, tired smile. "I've noticed." He nodded. "You passed." When he left, Kara sat alone for a moment longer. She felt different. Not lighter. Stronger. Not because she had proven something spectacular, but because she had held her ground without hardening. That night, walking back under the quiet hum of base lights, she understood something she hadn't before. Strength didn't always arrive as confrontation. Sometimes it arrived as patience that outlasted doubt. And sometimes that was the hardest test of all. What happens when the weight you've been carrying finally shifts and leaves you exposed instead of relieved? Kara felt it the morning after the operation, standing alone on the training deck while the base stirred awake around her. The air was cool, salt hung low. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged rhythmically as someone started their day the same way they always did, routine anchoring uncertainty. She should have felt accomplished. The mission had gone clean, decisions had held, no names were added to lists that mattered. Instead, she felt unsettled. Not because something had gone wrong, because something had changed. Trust had begun to form, and with it came a different kind of pressure. When you were doubted, expectations were low. When you were trusted, mistakes became heavier. They didn't belong to you alone anymore. She rolled her shoulders once, grounding herself, and began her warm-up without fanfare. Movement had always been the easiest way to think. The past few days replayed in fragments. The briefing room pause when she'd spoken up, the glance during the operation, the quiet acknowledgement afterward. None of it loud, none of it celebratory. Real. And real things demanded consistency. She finished stretching and moved through drills slowly, deliberately, each motion precise, not training for strength, training for control. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. "You're up early," the voice said. She recognized it, the team lead. "Couldn't sleep," she replied honestly. He nodded, standing beside her, gaze forward. He didn't crowd her, didn't loom. That mattered more than words. "Debrief been finalized," he said. "Command wants you present." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's new." "Everything is," he said, not unkindly. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that no longer felt evaluative, just shared. "You didn't force anything out there," he continued. "That's rare." Kara considered that. "Force breaks things," she said, "sometimes permanently." He looked at her then, not studying, understanding. "Be ready," he said. "Not everyone will like what you represent." She met his gaze calmly. "I'm used to that." He almost smiled. Why does scrutiny intensify right after trust begins? Because some people mistake calm competence for threat. The debrief room felt different this time. Smaller, closer, faces more attentive. Kara took her seat and waited. Questions came, technical, procedural, precise. She answered them clearly, without embellishment. When something hadn't been her call, she said so. When something had been, she owned it without dramatics. She felt eyes on her, not hostile. Assessing. Then came the question she knew would arrive eventually. "Lieutenant," a senior officer said, tone neutral, "how do you respond to criticism when it's persistent?" The room stilled slightly. Kara didn't answer immediately. She thought about the officers' club, about silence mistaken for weakness, about the cost of reacting when restraint was the better option. "I listen," she said finally. "I adjust when it's valid, and when it's not, I keep working." A pause. "And when it becomes personal," the officer pressed. She held his gaze. "Then it stops being about performance, and I don't engage." The answer landed quietly. Some nodded. Some didn't. That was fine. Afterward, as the room emptied, Kara remained seated for a moment longer. She felt the familiar tension return, not doubt but vigilance. Acceptance, she had learned, was rarely permanent. It had to be maintained. Outside, the base buzzed with mid-morning movement. She walked slowly, letting the rhythm settle her thoughts. She thought of her grandfather's words. Restraint separates control from chaos. Restraint wasn't passive. It was active choice. When does leadership reveal itself? Before the title or after the test? Kara learned the answer during training later that week. The session wasn't designed to spotlight anyone. It was a stress evolution, complex, layered, meant to fray communication and expose habits under pressure. She wasn't in charge, but pressure has a way of rearranging roles. As the scenario unfolded, confusion crept in. Not panic, something subtler, overlapping instructions, small delays, the kind that compound if left unchecked. Kara felt the pull to intervene and resisted it. Not yet. She watched, waited, measured. Then one of the newer operators froze, overwhelmed by conflicting directions. The moment stretched, fragile. Kara moved. She didn't take command, didn't raise her voice. She stepped into the young operator's line of sight and spoke clearly. "Breathe," she said. "Focus on me, one task." The operator exhaled, nodded, and moved. The rest of the team adjusted instinctively, tension easing as clarity returned. No one commented on it. But afterward, when the session ended, a few lingered near her, not asking questions, just present. One of them spoke quietly. "You didn't have to step in like that." Kara shrugged. "Someone did." "A beat." "Glad it was you," he said. She felt something tighten in her chest, not pride. Responsibility. Why does responsibility feel heavier than recognition ever did? Because it doesn't belong to you alone. That night, alone again, Kara sat on the edge of her bunk and let the exhaustion settle, the kind that reached deeper than muscles. She replayed moments, not to criticize herself but to understand them, where she'd acted, where she'd waited, where she might have chosen differently. She knew now that her presence had shifted something in the team, not dramatically, not uniformly, but enough to matter. That knowledge didn't comfort her. It sharpened her. She thought of the younger operator's eyes when he'd frozen, the relief when someone had cut through the noise without judgment. She thought of how easily power could have been misused in that moment, and how carefully it had to be handled instead. Leadership wasn't about control. It was about stewardship. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, the quiet hum of the bass filling the space. Tomorrow would bring more work, more scrutiny, more chances to choose restraint over reaction. She welcomed it, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And somewhere in the stillness, a truth settled in her bones, one she hadn't articulated before but had lived all the same. Strength wasn't proven in moments of dominance. It was proven in the willingness to carry weight without letting it change who you were. What happens when the weight you carry stops being symbolic and starts becoming operational? Kara felt it the moment the alert came through. Not urgency. Urgency was familiar. This was gravity. The briefing request was short. No details, just a location and a time that left no room for adjustment. She dressed without rush, hands steady, movements practiced. Outside, the base was quieter than usual, as if it sensed something tightening beneath the routine. In the hallway outside the secure room, she paused once. Not hesitation, orientation. She centered her breathing, reminded herself of the one rule that mattered when everything else blurred. Do the next right thing. Inside, the atmosphere was different from any briefing she'd attended so far. Fewer people, higher ranks, faces she didn't recognize, which usually meant decisions had already been made. She took her seat and waited. The screen lit up. The situation unfolded in layers. An allied asset compromised, a location that didn't forgive mistakes, intelligence incomplete, time compressed, and a narrow window closing fast. The plan wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. It needed to work. As details sharpened, Kara felt something settle into place. Not dread, not excitement. Clarity. Then it came. "Lieutenant Thorne," the admiral said, "you'll be forward on this." The room stilled. Not everyone looked at her, but enough did that she felt the shift ripple outward. "Your role," he continued, "is advisory and operational support. You'll be embedded. You will not be in charge." She nodded, "Understood, sir." "But," he added, meeting her eyes, "your assessment will carry weight." There it was. Not a title. Not authority. Trust. The kind that came with consequences. Why does trust feel heavier than doubt ever did? Because doubt only asks you to endure. Trust asks you to decide. As preparations accelerated, Kara moved through the process with focused calm. Gear checks, route confirmations, quiet coordination. No one challenged her presence. No one announced their acceptance either. That was fine. Acceptance that mattered didn't need applause. On transport, the noise of engines filled the space where conversation might have lived. Kara sat across from two operators she'd trained with before. Their eyes met briefly. No words exchanged. She felt oddly calm. Not numb. Ready. The terrain was worse than predicted. It always was. Wind cut visibility. Movement required patience more than speed. Kara stayed close to the team lead, feeding information when necessary, holding back when it was. They advanced slowly, methodically. Then the plan began to fray. Not collapse fray. A timing delay. A sensor behaving unpredictably. Small things that demanded decisions sooner than expected. Kara saw the pattern forming before anyone said it aloud. She leaned in, spoke quietly. "We're losing margin here." The team lead listened, didn't argue, adjusted. Minutes later, they reached a point of no return. The asset was closer than expected, and so were the risks. A decision had to be made. Proceed or abort. The room for debate vanished. The team lead looked at her, not asking permission. Asking judgment. Kara assessed fast, calculated distance, exposure, timing, the cost of action, the cost of retreat. She thought of the younger operator who had frozen days ago, of the responsibility she had accepted without ceremony. She inhaled. "We can do this," she said, "but only if we change the approach, now." They did. The operation moved forward under tighter control, every step deliberate. The world narrowed to essentials. Kara felt herself fully present, instincts aligning with training and experience. When it ended, it did so quietly. No celebration. Just relief. Why does relief always arrive tangled with aftermath? Because survival doesn't erase consequence. Back on base, the debrief was subdued. Success acknowledged without flourish. Mistakes cataloged without blame. Kara spoke when asked, nothing more. Later, alone in the corridor outside the room, she leaned briefly against the wall and closed her eyes. Not exhaustion, release. She felt the weight finally shift off her shoulders, replaced by something steadier. Belonging. Not because everyone liked her. Because they trusted her. Footsteps approached. "You held the line," the team lead said quietly. "So did everyone else," she replied. He nodded. "That's how teams work." A pause. "You know," he added, "some people are still adjusting." She met his gaze calmly. "I'm not here to rush them." He studied her for a moment. "Good, neither are we." When he left, Kara stood alone again, but it felt different now. Not isolated. Anchored. What does redemption look like when it isn't loud? It looks like consistency. Days passed, training resumed, routines returned. Kara moved through them with the same quiet discipline she always had. No one tested her openly. No one challenged her place. Instead, small things changed. She was asked for input earlier, trusted with nuance, included in conversations that once flowed around her. It wasn't universal, and it didn't need to be. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, she sat on the edge of the pier, boots dangling above the dark surface. The bass hummed behind her, distant and constant. She thought about the path that had brought her here, about silence mistaken for weakness, about restraint misunderstood as passivity. She thought about how close she had come, more than once, to reacting in ways that would have been easier but wrong. Her grandfather's voice echoed softly in her memory. "Anyone can be loud. Not everyone can wait." She smiled faintly. Waiting had been the hardest part. Why does the hardest test always come after you think you've passed? Because growth doesn't announce itself with finish lines. The next briefing arrived without warning. New tasking, different terrain, different risks. As Kara took her seat, she felt no knot in her stomach, no need to prove anything. She listened. She assessed. She prepared to do the work. Around her, the room felt steadier, not because doubt had vanished, but because it had been replaced by something stronger than certainty. Respect. Not given. Earned. As the meeting ended, she stood with the others, shoulders squared, gaze forward. She understood now that strength wasn't about the moment you knocked someone down. It was about every moment you chose not to. About carrying responsibility without letting it harden you. About holding the line without needing to own it. Sometimes, redemption doesn't come from correcting the past. It comes from choosing, again and again, to meet the present with quiet resolve. And sometimes that is enough. What remains when the noise finally fades, and the work is all that's left? Kara felt it on a morning that didn't announce itself. No alerts. No urgent briefings. Just the steady rhythm of a bass doing what it always did. She stood on the edge of the training field as the sun climbed, light breaking across concrete and steel. Around her, operators moved through routines that had been refined until they felt like instinct. There was comfort in that sameness, a reminder that the world didn't pause for personal milestones. She liked that. It meant she didn't have to be anything other than prepared. The last operation had closed cleanly, reports filed, lessons logged, the quiet kind of success that didn't invite commentary. Life had folded back into itself, and with it came a new understanding, subtle but unmistakable. No one was watching her anymore. Not in the way they had before. She wasn't being measured against an idea. She wasn't being tested for symbolism. She was being counted on. That realization settled slowly, the way truth often does when it doesn't need to impress. She joined the team without ceremony. No greetings louder than necessary. No glances that lingered, just shared space and shared purpose. It felt right. Why does peace feel unfamiliar after prolonged tension? Because the body remembers vigilance longer than the mind expects. As the day unfolded, Kara noticed small habits loosening their grip, the way she no longer tracked every reaction in the room, the way her shoulders didn't brace before speaking, the way silence didn't feel like a shield anymore. She still chose her words carefully, but now she chose them freely. During a planning session, a younger operator asked her a direct question about positioning, about timing, about judgment. Not tentative, not apologetic, just professional. She answered without overthinking it. Later, another asked her to review a scenario, then another. No one announced the shift. It simply happened, and with it came something unexpected. Grief. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just present. She hadn't allowed herself to feel it before, not fully. There had been too much to manage, too many variables demanding control. But now, in the absence of threat, memories found space. Her father's laugh, rare but unmistakable. Her grandfather's quiet patience. The weight of names that had shaped her path long before she understood what they cost. She carried them all without ceremony, as she always had. What does legacy mean when you stop running from it? It means accepting that it doesn't belong to you alone. That afternoon, Kara found herself walking beside her grandfather again, their steps aligned without effort. Time had curved his posture but not his presence. He still moved with intention, each step deliberate. "You've changed," he said after a while. She considered the statement. "I hope so." He nodded. "Change isn't weakness, it's adjustment." They stopped near the edge of the base, where the noise softened and the horizon widened. He didn't look at her when he spoke next. "People mistake restraint for absence," he said. "They think if you're not loud, you're not there." She smiled faintly. "They don't anymore." "No," he agreed, "they don't." They stood in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. "You did well," he added, not as praise but as acknowledgement. Not because you proved anything, because you didn't let the moment shape you into something you were. Kara felt the weight of that settle deeper than any commendation ever could. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, satisfied. Why do the most important moments never feel important at the time? Because they're quiet. The final test didn't arrive with danger or drama. It came as a choice. An opportunity for advancement, a role with more visibility, more authority, more expectation. The offer was real, earned, the kind many would have taken without hesitation. Kara didn't answer immediately. She thought about the room where everything had started, the laughter, the whispers, the hand that had risen toward her. She thought about the decisions that followed, the restraint, the waiting, the discipline that had shaped her response. She thought about the team, the trust that had formed not because she demanded it, but because she honored it. And she understood something clearly for the first time. Leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about being reliable. She declined the role. Not forever. Just for now. The decision surprised some, confused others. But it felt right. She stayed where the work was hardest and the recognition least, where presence mattered more than position, where her strength was most useful. What does strength look like when it no longer needs to prove itself? It looks like consistency. Weeks passed, then months. Kara became part of the rhythm, no longer an exception, no longer a question, just another operator who did the job with care and precision. She laughed occasionally, spoke when it mattered, waited when it didn't. New faces arrived, new doubts followed them. She recognized it instantly. And when she saw someone standing quietly at the edge of a room, taking up less space than they deserved, she didn't intervene loudly. She made space. That was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the base lights flickered on, Kara stood alone near the water again. The surface reflected the sky in muted tones, calm and unassuming. She breathed in the salt air. She wasn't proud. She was at peace. The journey hadn't made her harder. It hadn't made her louder. It had made her exact. She understood now that strength didn't arrive in moments of spectacle. It arrived in choices made when no one demanded them, in restraint exercised without applause, in dignity carried quietly through rooms that once doubted it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to become what others expect them to be. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.